It began in Africa.
Yeah.
We are controlling transmission.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you say?
Yeah. 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 Okay.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on to our conversation this morning. It's a really, really important conversation that we would like to engage with all of you to unpack what, the opportunities that the African Continental Free Trade Area is presenting.
Okay, thanks.
Before we get started, I'll just go through a few rules of engagement for our meeting. Please kindly make sure that all your microphones are muted over the course of the event, and when you do have something to say, if you could just ping us with the wave or a thumbs up, and then we'll give you entrance into the meeting. Perhaps let me just do a quick run through of our program this morning, just so we all know what we're expecting. We're going to kick off with our first speaker, who's going to be Isabella Seki. And she will present for about 10 minutes to be joined after that. The next presentation is going to come from John Rocha. And then we're going to have a presentation by Caroline Kende Rob. And then our final the next presentation will be by Japheth Mumioki. And our final presentation will be by Adetunji Omotola. You also get to know these guys. We will just run through their profiles before they come on to speak, so you get to know them a little bit better. And after that, we're going to have an open session that we're going to open up to our physical attendees here, and as well as all the other guests that we have on the Zoom call. And that will give us about 30 minutes to go through any questions and contributions. After that, we will have a question and answer segment that we'll conduct as a host, and closing remarks and a vote of thanks at the end, which will take us through to 1300 hours Johannesburg time. So we have at least just under 3 hours of engagement this morning. Thank you so much. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Nyasha. So basically today, first of all, we would like to thank the Gordon Institute of Business Sciences for allowing us to use this lovely venue. As some of you would know, the Gibbs is one of the best, if not the best, business school in Africa. As an alumnus of Gibbs myself, I'm very proud of this partnership Space has with Gibbs. And we thank specifically Dr. Morris Ntombeni, who is the interim head and the first ever Black head of Gibbs Business School. So we're very proud of this relationship, and we thank them. But we also thank Vivian Clark, who has been sterling in ensuring that even when we wanted to change the venue from the auditorium to a smaller venue because of social distancing, that they were able to allow us to do so. But also I wanted to let our guests know and our speakers that we're meant to have this event on the 28th of October, but out of respect to the victims of the NSAS in Lagos, that were attacked by the military, allegedly, we decided to postpone the event today. And we thank our speakers who have, in spite of that postponement, turned up today. So we thank Isabella, we thank Caroline, we thank John, and we thank Japheth. And yeah, so we salute everyone that has supported us all the way. So it's going to be fascinating. I will be speaking last, and I hope that I'll be able to match the quality of what my predecessors would be putting forward. But my sense is that there's no better time to talk about intra-Africa trade than now, especially given COVID, the damage that COVID has done to most African economies, if not all. we're very, very keen to explore. It's going to be a relaxed and jovial webinar or conference or conversation. I believe in the British style of engaging where wit and humor are not thrown in the dustbin. So we look forward to having a great session. Yasha, thank you for all the work you put in, and we're looking forward to a great session. So fasten your seatbelts. Don't go away. We'll be starting shortly with Isabella Sechi, who Yasha will introduce fully, because I believe we have to do justice to the profiles of our speakers. I thank you.
All right, so the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will create the largest free trade area in the world, which will be measured by the number of countries participating. The pact, which is connecting 1.3 billion people across 55 countries with a combined gross domestic product valued at 3.4 trillion. It has the potential to lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty, but achieving its full potential will depend on putting in place significant policy reforms and trade facilitation measures. The scope of the AFCFTA is large. The agreement will reduce tariffs among member countries and will cover policy areas such as trade facilitation and services, as well as regulatory measures such as sanitary standards and technical barriers to trade. Full implementation of the AFCTA would reshape markets and economies across the region, and of course boost the output in services, manufacturing, and natural resources sector. As the global economy is in turmoil due to the COVID-19 pandemic, creation of the vast AFCTA regional markets is a major opportunity to help African countries diversify their exports, accelerate growth, and attract foreign direct investment. So just with that background, obviously the opportunity that we're talking about this morning is a large opportunity, and some would say could possibly be the last remedy for Africa, if obviously everything is done appropriately, and the opportunity to lift up Africa out of poverty, create jobs, and grow our economies is huge and immense. And with that, I will move us over to the first speaker of today, and that is Isabella Edie Sekiyi. And I'll introduce her. She is an entrepreneur. She is CEO of the Trade Up Market Limited, and which is an e-commerce company ready to support businesses in Africa and the AFCTA. She's a staunch advocate for women empowerment and a member of Wakanda Women Trade Group. She's also a member of the 121 and a director of Emexa Petroleum Limited, which is a bulk oil distributing company in Ghana. And she is the first deputy executive director of the AFCTA Policy Network. Her expertise spans across e-commerce training and development, project management, policy strategist, research and data management, administrative management consultant, business development, and strategies in the petroleum industry. She holds a master's degree in project management, a first degree in psychology, and also business communication, public relations, marketing, and investigative research analysis. She's married with 4 children. She likes to bake. She loves reading, and she has a passion to mentor the younger generation. So Isabella, with that impressive profile, we're looking forward to your presentation this morning. If you give me a second, I will share my screen so that I can launch your presentation.
Thank you very much, Nyasha. Thank you for the opportunity given me. And I want to thank Afrospace for this opportunity. As she rightly said, I'll just touch down on AFTA, the history, what it has in stock for us, and the way forward. Thank you. So I'd like to comment with the history of AFTA. When we talk about AFTA, it's an acronym, and it connotes African Continental Free Trade Area. So after that, we've all been hearing, that is the meaning of it. And as the name connotes, it's for Africans, developed by Africans, made for Africans, and for Africans. So its history, it's commenced on the 21st March 2018 in Kigali, wherein we witnessed the 10th Extraordinary Summit of 44 African Heads of State and Government of 55 AU member states. And that actually commenced the signing of the agreement establishing the AFTA. It's also a flagship project of the AU 2063. and trading is built to commence in January 2021. Its mission is to actually create a single market for goods and services facilitated by the movement of persons in deepening the economic integration of the African continent. And so this also resonates with the Pan-African vision of Kwame Nkrumah, the late Kwame Nkrumah, wherein he said he was forging for a United States of Africa. I'm sure wherever he is today, he was smiling that we've gone back to the roots. Afterwards, also in every institution, it must be established on some protocols, though there are still some ongoing negotiations. But I'd like to highlight on the three main ones that have taken place so far. And that is the protocol on trade in goods. So anything concerning goods, elimination of duties, import taxes being reduced, but all this will be done progressively. Rules of origin wherein products emanating from Africa are exempted from taxes. Those not emanating from Africa are given a certain tax allocation. We come to the protocol on trade in services, which also hinges on services that promote the production of goods and services. So we have the IT, we have the banking sectors. All these fall under trade and services. In every institution, there must be some form of redress should conflicts arise. So we have the protocol on dispute settlement, which also sees to the settlement of any dispute that will come about during the trading activities. As I rightly said, the phase 2 has also commenced, and that is for intellectual property rights, investment, competition policies, and what have you. E-commerce is also on board, and it's also be dealt with in terms of its protocol and how it will govern e-commerce trading. So we'll ask the question, how do we benefit from after? We as Africans, because knowledge is power. Once you are informed, you know how to go about it. So after is considered to be one of the world's largest free trade area since WTO, in terms of the numbers of participating countries, which will consolidate great trading opportunities and encourage sustainable growth. As Nyashi said, it is going to cover a market of 1.2 billion people with a projected GDP of 2.5 trillion across all 55 African countries. So basically, this is what AFTA it's promoting through movement of goods and services and people across the continent. We're going to create a single African market that will promote trade in Africa. There will also be progressive elimination of prevailing tariffs of 6.1. In the initial stages, or the narrative before, is that Africans exporting to other African countries face very higher tariffs than non-African countries. This will be eradicated when AFTA comes on board, though it will be progressively done. So, who are the countries that we are talking about? Earlier on, I did mention about 55 African countries. Out of the 55 African countries, with the exception of Eritrea, 54 have signed to the agreement. But it's not just signing. You must sign, you must rectify, and you must deposit. So currently, only 35 have rectified. We are hoping the others will join soon. And that also includes Angola, Cameroon, and Nigeria. So what does AFTA have for small to medium-sized enterprises? SMEs have accounted for 80% of regional businesses in Africa. So AFTA is going to herald a paradigm shift from exports of raw materials to industrialized products. That is value addition to raw materials to products that initially were emanating from Africa. So we're going to look at lower intra-African tariffs on intermediate and final goods. SMEs have long been known to struggle to penetrate more advanced countries. AFTA is going to make it very easy for us to now move into the regional export destinations, which will act as a catalyst for expansion into overseas market. And here I would like to commend I2I, an NGO that is promoting this cause for SMEs to compete globally with the world out there. Now, AFTA has also made provisions for less industrialized countries and the advanced countries, all African countries, because in the sphere of things, the fingers are not the same. So definitely there'll be people who are more advanced and those not advanced. So for African countries that are more industrialized, they will have to take advantage of opportunities for manufactured goods. The less industrialized countries will take opportunity of the regional value chains, wherein they will supply raw materials and what have you to the bigger companies, for them to also move on with the trading activities. AFTA already acknowledges that tariffs on raw materials are already low. So how are they going to promote this drive? That is, we find it in the action plan of the BIAT, which outlines areas of investment required, trade information, facilitation, access to finance, and etc. So now African countries who are agriculturally based have the opportunity to satisfy Africans' growing food security requirements. In Ghana, Canaan Farm, for instance, it's an active farm that has been there for over 10 years and is promoting the cause of agriculture. It's also addressing food insecurity through its agricultural produce and processing standards. Some of the products are in mangoes, coconut, salt, fish farming, vegetables, and African herbs. So it also has arable land available for those out there who want to come on board to Ghana to invest in the agriculture sector. I'm a very passionate woman when it comes to women empowerment. And so I tend to look at what AFTA has for women in the informal sector and the informal sector at large. We know that in the informal sector has always been marginalized to an extent. And we are looking at Ghana and Africa in the larger sphere of things, wherein Africa has had 80% of its workforce employed in the informal sector, which has been characterized by income security, underemployment, bad working condition, and low wages. So how do we address this agenda? Prior to all this in Ghana, prior to AFTA coming on board, the government of Ghana took it upon itself to introduce the NIA, which I think is the National Identification Authority, to come up with a national ID card. And I think I must commend the government for that, because in all this incorporation, what happens is that the informal sector have been duly incorporated into the system, because they now have TIN numbers, they now have a unique IP, and they can also safely and comfortably commence transaction in their day-to-day economic transaction in their day-to-day endeavors. So what are the challenges of the informal sector? We have wide wage gap between the men and the women. What is AFTA bringing on board? What are we also doing as individuals, as stakeholders in the game? We are looking at economic empowerment of women, because the gap is quite extensive. And I think that if we forge forward with equality in wages and salaries across Africa, women will also benefit. Gender equality is also something that is rife. Gender balance is key. By default, women spend more time on marital duties or tree opportunities in trade. Hence, government and policymakers are being admonished to give some incentives that will progressively curtail gender inequality. Eradication of cultural or social norms that bar women from engaging in economic activities. So AFTA agreement has also done well by emphasizing the same problems that we're also speaking about, that is the gender inequality, and is mandating government to support women to export. I move on to, I'll just scroll through because time is of essence here. We come to the standardization constraints and inadequate awareness. We are looking at training hubs and sensitizations. CSOs like Wakanda is also driving the agenda of sensitization, personal development of women to come up in their economic endeavors. Data is something that has been a challenge in Africa. Access to data. How do we generate our own data in this AFTA movement? AFTA has looked at it, and I'm also calling out and saying that AFTA must generate its own data and not third parties. So in light of the access of data, we're looking at the Secretariat having a place or a desk for basically women on anything relating to trade and AFTA. It will interest you to know that we do have a place set in the Secretariat, that is Entrepreneurial and Women with Vocation and Medium Enterprise Unit in the Secretariat to cater for women. This is just a small write-up on what Wakanda does in promoting women in Africa. Currently, we are in Ghana, and we're hoping that we'll move across Africa to promote the cause of women. So we're basically looking at regionalization of standards of products to meet global standards, facilitating community level aggregation, supporting policies that is inclusive of women, awareness and sensitization of after, as I said earlier on, I'd like to reiterate that too, is one of our key vision in Wakanda. And we are also looking at developing value chains and capacitation of women to compete favorably using hubs on industrialization seminars. After an e-commerce, that is going to be in the later negotiation stages, but I'd like to touch on that too. As we all know, e-commerce is thriving with the emergence of COVID-19 and its drastic effect on our various economies. So e-commerce it's a space wherein it connects businesses to the larger market. So after Secretariat and after on its own, it's looking at merging these things and bringing out protocols to guide their deliberations. It will also interest you to know that Google and Amazon have approached the Secretary General, that is Mr. Wamkeli Meni, to express their interest to invest in the data storage centers on the African continent. But it's my plea that smaller African e-commerce business should not be neglected in policies or negotiations therein. Africa must own its own data. In the spirit of after, a Ghanaian-owned e-commerce company, that is Straight Up Market, is promoting the cause of women and men, the larger picture, wherein we are promoting African products, where you're giving the opportunity to tell your own story the African way. Industries in Ghana that will drive the after agenda. The creative arts industry, those are the industries we're looking at. We're looking at garments and textiles industry, hospitality industry. We're looking at agribusiness products. We're looking at cereals. We're looking at petrochemical. We're looking at pharmaceutical products. We're looking at local technologies, labor exploitation. So if you find yourself in any of this arena, I think you should get ready to join the after vehicle. In a nutshell, I would like to reiterate and look at the products in Ghana that we can also actually use to drive the after movement. Driving the after vehicle, driving the mission and vision, because in everything, as I said earlier on, implementation is key. Ghana is noted for its chocolates. As a friend told me, he said, it's the only chocolate he knows that doesn't melt. And so I think it's an opportunity for Ghana to come, or those doing chocolate in the chocolate industry, come on board and make sure that every African gets a portion of this wonderful chocolate from Ghana. Another product from Ghana is shea butter. Shea butter is sending waves in the economic arena. And I would like to encourage all women and men in this industry to get on board. Another project I would also like to talk about is shooter, black shooter. Black shooter, there's high demand in the US for black shooter, and I'm sure other African countries will also say, because it's a unique product wherein the shooter is packed and it can stay on the shelf for so long. We're looking at shooter in its context and how we can get it across the whole of Africa and the non-African countries too as well. We have the creative art industry. Bell and Elle is also another fashion industry. They are looking at doing only African products, not just beads, but anything African. And Ghana is noted for its kente. So we're looking at sending kente to everyone for all your formal and informal engagements. We'll just incorporate the kente move into it, and we'll speak the African language in our own way. On this note, I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity once again.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for that incredible presentation. And, I, for one, wish I could have a bite into that chocolate right now. Certainly vow for shea butter. My husband made a trip to Accra once, bought back shea butter, and I haven't got it back. It's absolutely incredible.
It's incredible.
It's us being able to replace. I mean, when you think about it, and I don't say these brands to denigrate them, but we need to, start replacing Ferrero with the Ghanaian chocolate.
Definitely.
Yeah, with shea butter and so much more. So thank you so much for provoking our minds with that presentation. And with that, I will move on to our second speaker for our event, and that is Caroline Candice. Sorry, Caroline. Can I ask you to come next? Our other two speakers have are still to join us. They're a little bit delayed, so they'll come later. So I hope you're ready for that. So Caroline Kender is a senior advisor for the African Center for Economic Transformation. That's acronymed ASSET. She's a Pan-African think tank, which is a Pan-African think tank. She is a former executive director of the Africa Progress Panel, which is chaired by which was chaired by Kofi Annan. She is chief advisor at the Education Commission to retired Honorable Gordon Brown, and Secretary General at K International, as well as senior manager at the World Bank and IMF. Caroline worked at the World Bank for 10 years as a senior manager and technical expert for the Sustainable Development Network in the regions of Africa, Europe, and Central Asia, as well as East Asia. In that role, she led teams of technical experts to implement the World Bank loans and grants, and she conducted policy research on a range of global issues, which include macroeconomic policies and poverty outcomes, conflict and fragility, climate change, social justice, and financial crises. Caroline began her career in management for 5 years in the private sector. She then worked for the EU, and she then worked for the Gambian government as a business and community development advisor based in a small fishing village, I beg your pardon. Consequently, Caroline was the West Africa Field Director for Africa Now, which is a small CSO, and the poverty alleviation focal point for the UNDP in the Gambia as well. Before joining the World Bank, Caroline was the first poverty and social development advisor recruited by the International Monetary Fund to manage the introduction of a poverty and social perspective into the fund's macroeconomic programs and policy dialogue. Caroline is a part of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council in Africa. She is also an advisor for CAMFED, which is a CSO focused on education of girls in Africa. And she's also an ambassador for Protect African Lions. She is the author of many publications, including Can the Poor Influence Policy, a book which was co-published by the World Bank and the IMF. She holds a BA honors in geography and a master's in science and social policy from the London School of Economics. Caroline, sounds like you've had 9 lifetimes from that profile. So we're really privileged to have you this morning share from your vast knowledge and experience. Please go ahead and give us a presentation this morning.
Great, thank you. I have to say you guys are extremely clear from my end. It's wonderful. I can see everybody clearly, and so if there's a problem, just give me a shout and I can stop and we can sort things out on the technical front, because I know that's always challenging. So please don't hesitate to just stop me and we can sort it out. So I was just saying that thank you, Isabella, for your presentation. I thought that was fantastic. And I think one thing is that this could be transformational. The whole African continental free trade area has huge potential. Now, I've been asked to talk about the opportunities of this agreement, and what I'd like to start to do is really frame the quick 10 minutes I'm going to give by starting with the global context. And then I will connect that to what's happening in Africa with the African continental free trade area. So I think the global context is super relevant, and the reason is because we live in this rapidly changing world with multiple interconnected challenges, including COVID, which has already been mentioned, but also climate change, inequality, migration, displacement, and multiple disasters. And added to these interconnected challenges are the complexities of rapid technological change, which is fundamentally transforming the way we live. And this technology change, as we're all finding out, has been radically accelerated this year due to COVID. So our world is unpredictable, it's uncertain, and it's fragile. And I'll just give you 4 examples, which I think are very relevant to this discussion. So the fragility is associated with our rules, which are kind of rules-based international order. And some people would argue that we've actually got world disorder rather than an international order. Secondly, as we all know, there's huge uncertainty like never before related to global growth. And with the global economy in turmoil, we are still wanting and waiting to understand the full economic impact of COVID. Further, as we know, global markets were already strained by trade tensions, and the pandemic basically has added a massive shock to this. Going forward, businesses face significant uncertainty. And thirdly, globalization is being challenged, and worryingly, multinationalism is under threat. In many countries, we have seen a rise of populism and nationalism, and these countries include the United States under Trump, Brazil and India, and in the UK, we have seen a political climate that has led to Brexit. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought great uncertainty, leading to further protectionism and increasing nationalism. So in the face of COVID-19's, countries, societies, and communities are all being reshaped. We can see this around us. How we respond will change political and social systems, creating new social norms. And these challenges are both complex and evolving, and they demand collective action. And yet from the beginning of this crisis, global leadership and cooperation have been lacking. So that's the global context. So now I'd like to connect this global context to the African continental free trade area. And I think it's super significant that this agreement comes at a time when much of the world is actually turning away from free trade and from cooperation. And yet this is a time where we need cooperation, we need more trade, and we need more coordination regionally and globally as we face these challenges. So this agreement highlights a significant continental-wide commitment to reducing poverty through trade more than ever before. And as we've heard, it will reshape markets and economies across the region, leading to the creation of new industries and the expansion of key sectors. And importantly, it would make African countries more competitive on a global level. So indeed, it's a huge opportunity, like we've heard, but in the context of COVID, it's a huge opportunity to build back better. So in short, the agreement can help African countries diversify their exports, accelerate growth, increase foreign direct investment, drive sustainable development, increase employment opportunities and incomes, reduce poverty, and broaden economic inclusion. And as Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala recently stated, and I quote, "I think trade is important to developing countries because trade is an instrument. It's part of an arsenal of tools, if you will, with which a country approaches development." And she added, "Trade is a force for good, and properly harnessed can lift millions out of poverty and bring shared prosperity." And this is the context within which we find the agreement and the whole transformation that it could bring to Africa. So looking at the opportunities, I just want to share with you some really interesting facts and figures. So as both of the previous speakers have mentioned, the agreement will create the largest free trade area in the world, measured by the number of countries participating. So it connects 1.3 billion people to 55 countries with a combined gross domestic product valued at 3.4 trillion. So it's huge. And if we also consider that Africa's population by 2050 will double to about 2.4 billion, so it'll almost double, the size of this market is going to be huge. But at the same time, it's quite important to remember that Africa currently just accounts for 2% of global trade, and only 17% of African exports are intercontinental, compared to 59% for Asia and 68% for Europe. So there's huge potential. So according to a recent World Bank report, if implemented fully, this trade agreement could first boost regional income by 7%, and that's huge, that's $450 billion. Speed up wage growth for women. And I think, Isabella, this is a really important point because there is huge potential here really to transform the lives of women, whether they be in the formal or informal sector. And in addition, the pact has the potential to lift, as we've already heard, 30 million people out of extreme poverty by 2030. It could also has the potential to increase Africans' exports by 560 billion, mostly in manufacturing, and to boost wages for both skilled and unskilled workers, 10.3% for unskilled and 9.8% for skilled workers. So the intracontinental exports would increase by 81%, while the increase in non-African countries would be 19%. And just another really big number before I talk about implementation. According to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, if successfully implemented, the agreement could generate a combined consumer and business spending of $6.7 trillion by 2030. And I just find those numbers really, really important because it gives us a sense of the scale and the potential and the huge opportunities. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about implementation. And I've been asked to talk about opportunities, but I just want to note the importance of implementation a little bit like Isabella did as well. And in a recent article by Ed Brown and George Boiteng from the African Centre for Economic Transformation states that the agreement will accelerate economic transformation and it will help Africa escape the colonial legacies, as the way in which a lot of the trade is structured is through this colonial legacy. And they call the agreement a game changer, but they stress rightly that the devil is in the implementation. And they recommend a bottom-up approach which focuses on national problems that require cross-border solutions, such as shared water resources, regional energy markets, and highways. And the successful implementation of the agreement would help cushion the negative effects of COVID-19 on economic growth by supporting regional trade and value chains through the reduction of trade costs. And I think that's so important at this moment in time, because COVID has already caused major disruptions to trade across the continent, including in critical goods such as medical supplies and food. And the pandemic is expected to cause up to 79 billion in output losses in Africa in 2020. In the longer term, the implementation of the agreement could help African countries increase their resilience in the face of future economic and other shocks. But the trade agreement does not necessarily lead to an outcome of reduced inequality. And there's a lot of inequalities in wealth and power across the continent. And I think it's significant and important to just note that. So when we're looking at these significant policy reforms and trade facilitation measures, which are required, but at the same time, there is a need also to look at inequalities and the need to track and monitor, like has already been mentioned. So careful monitoring of impacts on all workers, including women and men, and skilled and unskilled, across all countries and sectors, is required to ensure the agreement's full benefits. So in conclusion, I think countries across the world are facing these multiple threats and the interconnected multiple threats I mentioned at the beginning that demand this long-term thinking and cooperation. And in my view, this is precisely what the African Continental Free Trade Area represents. And I just want to share a quote from President Akufo-Addo, who recently stated that COVID-19 pandemic has heightened the importance of the success of this agreement. And he added, and I'll quote, "The destruction of global supply chains has reinforced the necessity for closer integration amongst us so that we can boost our mutual self-sufficiency, strengthen our economies, and reduce our dependence on external sources." So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Caroline. Absolutely. I will not try and attempt to put everything that you shared into a sentence or two, but I think simply to say there's lots of information that you shared that I think a lot of us will be able to, just probe and ask and seek clarity as the event continues. But thank you so much for that impressive presentation. So to move on to our next speaker, we are now joined by Mr. Jafet Munyoki. Welcome. Thank you for making it.
Thank you.
Hello. All right. I'll give a short introduction of Jafet. Jafet Munyoki is a CFA with an MBA. He is an investment banking professional, and his experience is in various fields, which include equities research on macro and counter-specific coverage, in asset management, involved in developing indices for licensing to asset managers across a range of themes, including relative value and macro strategies. He's also been involved in stockbroking and in the development of a Pan-African execution platform to offer access to institutional clients into the African continent. And for his corporate advisory background, he was involved in origination and execution of transaction with Goodson Capital Partners. He's also involved in social media strategy and was involved in Africa strategy, which was centered around value add to continent focused cross assets buy and sell side, participants on chat rooms, on web portals, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. So in a nutshell, his specialities are in asset management, in business development, in concept development, in corporate finance, in social media, in customer relations, drafting, equities, focused marketing, Microsoft Access, modeling, negotiation, print media, relationship management, research, sales, securities, strategic, and as well as writing. Jafet, we can't wait to hear what you have to share with us on this conversations. And after, if I can hand over the microphone to you, please go ahead and share with us.
I want to touch on a couple of things where I think the hardest part is from previous speakers. I had to leave out some of the aspects that they brought out. But I think I'll be able to still paint a picture in terms of where we are at in our view in the continent, plus what we think will be the issues around free trade implementation from a standpoint of key drivers in terms of industries, as well as the issue around regional blocks and language blocks that we have in the continent. So essentially, the way we look at it is it's a fantastic idea because we basically are able now to, sort of pave way for a customs union. The issue around ratification of tariffs, elimination, or import quotas that we've set for each other as African countries have not been to the benefit of the people, just because of goods and services not being able to be exchanged across for the benefit of the continent. But essentially, the way we look at it is we have an opportunity, one, to amalgamate the continent and be able to benefit from just the efficiencies that we can create cross-border. So there is even a recent report done by African Development Bank that estimates that intertrade will be increased by 15% by 2022, which will mean 35 billion annually in terms of intertrade. And of course, that means by 2022, we'll be able to now see intertrade, especially on where we spend most of the money on imports. Interestingly, when you look at Africa, we do import, for example, I think it's petroleum and mineral oils to the tune of 60 billion, but we have the largest producers of the same. So we have Nigeria. So essentially, that is something that will be beneficial for the continent, because when you look at even the total imports, we're talking at 549, and that's as at last year, $1 billion in terms of cash that has been spent on imports into the continent. But we don't take advantage of the usual intertrade that we can basically manage just because we're able to just eliminate the tariffs that we've been, sort of putting in to make intertrade inefficient. Now, the advantage is when you look at your large imports, most of the countries across, it's the same story because it's your motor vehicles, it's your aircraft, it's your machinery, chemicals, equipment that they actually import. But we have capabilities to actually have revival of local industries that will be able to sustain the same in the continent and be able to also booster in terms of trade for export properly into into other continents. Now, the issue for us when we look at the free trade areas and the issues around Africa and economic efficiency, it makes 100% sense for us to sort of look at it from the regional blocks that we've had, look at it from a standpoint of eruption of wars, just because the issue has been poverty and the issue has been political upheavals, and that has not been conducive for local industries to thrive. When I look at economies of the future, I'm basically thinking we need to look at the youth and what they can bring in. We need to look at platforms that can make trade efficient. And that's basically payment platforms, because when you look at regional blocks where you have your trade blocks like Yokomesa, Zigads, and the rest, you don't see efficiency, and that's why they've never been able to sort of efficiently operate. And the biggest problem is that it's in the spirit of the signing of those agreements where there's an issue, because they'll sign an agreement on zero tariffs and there'll still be customs and excise duties at the borders. Now that sort of inefficiency has basically been impacting trade across, but I think with this particular initiative, it will help out a lot. Now, from a local industry perspective, one, it will address issues around job losses, issues around labor and environmental issues, because essentially fair trade will basically become a concept that we have to embrace. When we look at what has to be done in terms of key drivers, I think we now moving to a digital economy. So I think services will basically be provided more digitally. So essentially, you will be able to manage from that standpoint, and we need to be more futuristic in terms of what we want to play at in terms of services. When it comes to goods, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that there's mass manufacturing and efficiencies already created by China and the rest of them. So for us to compete, we need to start looking at what we really need as countries in Africa, and also what the world will require in terms of what we can supply them. So essentially, Africa has worked very well in the past in terms of, sort of internal efficiencies on certain areas. But in this case, I think implementation will be critical, but there is, sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a positive conversation to have. Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you very much, Japheth, for that presentation. And I think a whole lot of subjects that are being raised here. Thank you for just bringing in a broader scope to the areas that we need to obviously look at in order for the success of the AFCFTA. With that, I will move on to our next speaker, and that is Adetunji Omotola, who is the co-founder of Afrospace, as well as the founder of 12 Disciples, which is a leadership think tank. Tunji, if you could please share with us your thoughts and deliberations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, sure. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective. My background is in law, communications, wine, and of course, I'm passionate about politics, particularly African politics, because I think it's very dramatic. There's always something cooking, and so I'm glad to be here. My job is very simple. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about African currencies, because as I was saying to Mappy earlier, just outside, if you're South African and you want to do business in Nigeria, you still have to, or you want to go to Nigeria, you have to change your rands into dollars. When you get to Lagos, you change your dollars into Naira. And then when you're coming back, if you have maybe 10,000 Naira, 20,000 Naira, if you're not lucky to have bought all the material in Balogun market, which many ladies tend to do, you then have to carry that money to the airport, and when you bring it to South Africa, it's of no value because no one will accept the Naira. And these are the two biggest economies in Africa. There's no synergy between currencies. But before I go deeper into that, and also to talk about my other thing, which is the countries, the smaller countries in Africa, who's going to take care of them? Countries like Gambia with a GDP of about $1 billion and a debt to GDP ratio of about 110%. So who takes care of Gambia? Now, I want to quote two gentlemen that I have a lot of respect for. Firstly, I'll start with Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General and the chairman of the Africa Progress Panel, who passed on 2 years ago. He said this a few years ago. He said, there will be no sustainable development without peace and security, and there will be no peace and security without sustainable development. And he said, for this to happen, they must be based on the pillars of respect for human rights and the rule of law. Now, the reason why I quote this is because if you look at Africa in the past few weeks, there's been problems in Cameroon, in Kumba, I believe, where they killed young people, children as young as 5. And there was not really global outrage about that. But I also know that there was an American citizen that was rescued in Nigeria. He had been kidnapped in Niger Republic. And the American SEALs went there and rescued one American citizen successfully. I think there are about 30 of them in that team. Now, so that worries me, what's going on in Africa. In Nigeria, recently we had protests. We had scenes of looting and arson in Lagos, the commercial capital of Nigeria, with about 30 million people. Lagos is the nerve center of Nigeria. If you take Lagos out of Nigeria, there isn't much left. In terms of internally generated revenue, Lagos generates more than the same revenue for 20 states in Nigeria. So more than 50% of the states in Nigeria generate less than Lagos, one state. Now, so that worries me. In Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed got his Nobel a few years ago, was celebrated. Now today, the prosperity around Ethiopia is being threatened because of the incursions in the Tigray region. And there's so many other countries that I don't think I have enough time to mention. So that's Kofi Annan. Now Dangote, we're talking about Africa free trade. Africa's richest man, Alhaji Aliko Dangote, cannot export cement from Nigeria into Benin, Republic of Benin, next door. It's practically about 20 kilometers from Badagry, a place called Sebe Border. You just cross it, you're in Benin. You cross it by foot. For those of you who have watched that movie Oloture on Netflix, that border where those girls, in the end, where they had to go in a bus, that's the Seme border. I've been through that border. You go through a nightmare. I don't even want to talk about those land borders. It's a nightmare to go through Seme. But anyway, so Dangote cannot take his cement into Benin. So where does the cement come from? It comes from China. And he was saying this to Mo Ibrahim. He was very sad when he said it. And Mo Ibrahim was surprised. And he was looking for a Beninois in the crowd, but he couldn't find any Beninois to say why they wouldn't buy cement from Aliko Dangote. Now that gives you a sense of the challenge in Africa. Next door, we can't even do business. So how are we going to do business further down the map? And also Dangote said something that was curious. A few years ago when the Africa Free Trade was launched, I think just before that, there was the African Union passport, which was given to Aliko because he's invested in about 16 countries in Africa. And most of those investments are about $400 million each, whether it's in Mwanza, or Mtwara in Tanzania, or in the Roma region in Ethiopia, or in South Africa, in Delmas, Mpumalanga. Dangote has invested heavily. When you talk about Africans investing in Africa, Dangote is one of those champions, along with MTN and the usual suspects. So Dangote says, okay, I'm traveling, I've got the AU passport, which is a diplomatic passport, but when I get to the countries where I do business, They will ask me for my passport. I tell them this is the AU passport. And then they still proceed to stamp that AU passport with a visa. So you've got a diplomatic passport, they still issue the visa on a diplomatic passport. So there's the communications between Addis Ababa of the commission and, the regions, the airports in, whether it's Lubumbashi or Lagos or Accra, there's no effective communication in terms of migration, immigration. So that's a worry that I have. But now moving away from that, currencies in Africa, we have 33 currencies for 55 countries. I think that is a joke. Because if you look at countries in the Central Africa, they use the CFA. And West Africa, there's also CFA for the French-speaking countries. So those countries are practically the French have their knees on their necks. I mean, these guys are actually putting their reserves in the French treasury, which when they borrow, they borrow their own money at interest from the French. And the interesting thing, because we don't look at this thing, politics and economics are linked. So what happens in Cote d'Ivoire? Because the architect, the person that is supposed to move that needle in West Africa for the French part is a guy called Alassane Ouattara. But what does Alassane Ouattara do? He's now gone for an illegal third term. So he's going to be there protecting the French interest. So we're not going to see much change in that area. So I'm very concerned. But also in British West Africa, where Nigeria, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, and countries like Gambia are, we have the Dalasi, the Cedi, we have the Sierra Leone, we have the Nigerian Naira. How do you trade amongst each other when you have all this currency? And the sad thing about it is that the countries that have big economies, like Nigeria and Kenya, their currencies are not as strong as if you look at Namibia, Swaziland, you look at Botswana, because what you have is Namibia and Lesotho and Swaziland. Because they're part of the Southern African Customs Union, their currencies are pegged to the rand. So they've got strong currencies, but what is their economy like? What is the competitive advantage of Botswana vis-a-vis Nigeria? There isn't much to talk about. What does Botswana export into Nigeria? There isn't much to talk about. So this Africa free trade thing, we have to thoroughly investigate it, because without currency, that's why they use the word currency, it's current. When we have volatility of currencies, people celebrate Ghana and Zambia as their currencies being strong. They actually are in the top 10. But if you inspect it and interrogate it, all they've done is to take out 3 zeros from their currencies. Because I remember when I was in Ghana many years ago, it was about 5,000 or 8,000 cedis to one. Now it's 5 cedis to $1. How does that work? 8,000 cedis in 1996 to $1. Now it's 5 cedis to $1. All they've done is take out 3 zeros. So I really worry about the fact that we're not really probing why we have so many currencies, and these currencies are not even taken. They're not accepted next door. So that's a big concern of mine. But now going to the smaller countries, because if African Continental Free Trade Area is going to work, the poorer countries, why do those countries have high tariffs? Because they don't really have revenue coming in. I'll give you an example of states in Nigeria where 20 states are generally less IGR than Lagos. So a country like Benin, Togo, Malawi, countries like Gambia, why would they be excited about the Africa free trade? What are they going to bring to the market? When you look at America fighting with China, they've got lots to fight about. America has military, the Chinese have their manufacturing, America has huge global media. The Chinese are sophisticated on many levels, and they have a huge internal market, like Nigeria does. And a lot of people in Nigeria will tell you that they don't need to go anywhere because they have 20 million people in Lagos alone. And it makes sense. And it's one currency, and they don't need to fill any forms. So if you're doing business in Lekki and you're going to Mushin, you don't need to fill any form. You don't need to see any immigration official. You don't have to face xenophobia. You don't have to face, oh, you're not from around here and so on. Or even a language barrier if you had to go to Niger. So I feel that the smaller countries, I just wanted to share some statistics because statistics used to be one of my best subjects when I was in university. So if you look at Malawi, intra-Africa trade profile for Malawi 2018. A whole country exports only $3 million. That is pocket change for Aliko Dangote. And guess what? Look at the inverse, or the converse. They import $809 million worth of goods. But where did those goods come from? We'll see later on. Now, out of the exports and imports of that magnitude, $318 million, $809 million, the intra-Africa exports portion is only 36%. So about 60-something% almost goes to outside Africa. And for imports, they only import 30% in terms of intra-Africa out of that $809 million. So Malawi is not doing so great. And even though their exports grew by 7%, their imports also grew by 7%. So there isn't a lot of excitement around that because they cancel each other out. But if you then look at what they imported from the rest of Africa, it's very interesting. Unused postage stamps, which is 4%, unmanufactured tobacco, mineral or chemical fertilizers, and also they do motor vehicles, which is about 2%. So they're not really importing anything that is going to aid manufacturing, almost like Nigeria, where we export crude and then we import the refined petroleum. We run down our refineries, and then a private individual goes to Sao Tome and builds a refinery there and sends the refined petroleum back to Nigeria. It's almost like round trip in foreign exchange. So the reason why I use Malawi is because this is a country within SADC that should be enjoying a lot of protection. And maybe it can even be a satellite, you know, if you look at Djibouti and places like that. But unfortunately, rather than build those countries, what do we see? It's like Zimbabwe, Malawi, and so on. We see those folks having to run away from their country, almost like slaves in their neighboring country that is richer. That's not going to, so without people that can be manufacturing and doing great things, trade and so on, building business in their country, they become slave labor in a richer country, in the same region, and what they rely on is to send in pittance to their families, what the World Bank celebrates as remittances. So in my view, the Africa Free Trade Area for me, and I have to be very blunt, and I said this in Lake Como in 2015, the guys who are driving this whole thing, it's at the AU level, it's at the political level. I don't see a lot of businessmen like Aliko's problem that I highlighted earlier, the Elumelus and so on. I don't see them sitting side by side with Akufo-Addo and Buhari, like we see in Europe, America, where they put business side by side with their politics. Our politicians are going around and doing all these fancy agreements, but then when you want to go into that country to do business, it's so difficult. I'll give you a simple example, and with all due respect to Isabella, there's a law in Ghana, the GIPC law, that says that foreigners must bring $1 million to do petty trade. Petty trade can be selling mobile phones or whatever. Law has hit hard Nigerian traders in Ghana, and as a result of a lot of uncertainty and frustration, even in one case, a woman committed suicide. Because when they lock your business up, what are you going to do? And this is a country, Ghana, that is the secretariat for the African Continental Free Trade Area. But the laws there are anti-ECOWAS, the spirit of Africa Free Trade. And I thought I should put that out there because Ghana and Nigeria in that Southwest African region are the beacons for hope on many levels, even the diaspora. So I'll end on this point. Whilst I'm excited about it, I'm excited about this. In operation, it is difficult to get so optimistic when you look at all these examples I've offered. But my prayer, though, is that we should begin to have leaders that appreciate that they need to bring the Pan-African perspective, a global diasporan perspective to the political economy of Africa, because we can't continue to be in the slow lane, having weak currencies that are 10,000 to $1, and we're importing finished goods in the 21st century. I'll finish with this, and I say it with conviction. I believe strongly with conviction that Africa is in diaspora, led by Nigerians, who contribute $23 billion annually in remittances. I want to talk about their net asset value, are the ones who are going to drive this real Africa prosperity. I thank you.
Right, thank you so much, Adetunji, for that presentation, and of course, highlighting some issues that were not yet previously mentioned, talking about currency issues, talking about language barriers, in order for the trade blocs to be successful. And on that note, I'm going to take us to the point of our program where we open the discussion to all our guests online and those who are here with us in attendance at Gibbs. While we wait for our final speaker, who will be John Rosher, to join us at 11:30. So with that, if anybody, a lot has been shared, a lot has been discussed, and I hope you're all taking notes. And if maybe I can pick on someone to kick us off with just a contribution. I'll go to you, Duncan, and ask Duncan that give us your deliberations on some of the issues that have been highlighted, the implementation, being obviously, as Caroline put it, the devil's in the implementation. Let's talk about that with your vast experience across the continent, with the projects that you do. Let us know what is that. Is there real potential? Is there real potential in our African?
Hi, Nyasha. Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
It's a little loud. Sorry, our time says. Just turn it down a little.
Let me turn it down a bit on my side.
Okay, I think you can go.
Is that better?
Yeah, so much better. All right, Duncan, please just introduce yourself and then you kick us off with your contribution.
Thanks very much. My name's Duncan Bonnet. I am a director at a company called Africa House. We assist companies that are looking to expand their businesses across sub-Saharan Africa, whether they are African companies or foreign companies. Yeah, I mean, our perspective on the Continental Free Trade Agreement has been well set out by many of the people who've already spoken this morning. And I think that the key thing is that unless it is implemented correctly, it's not really that valuable. We've seen this from a South African perspective with things like the SADC trade protocol, with some of the other trade agreements that we have, is that the business community is quite lethargic about taking advantage of some of the trade agreements. They don't understand, they don't know what the benefits are, and as a result, they don't benefit from them. I think as well, it requires proper implementation from all the signatory governments to prevent smuggling of goods from non-participating countries, false declarations. We see that across the continent. So a lot of that needs to be done at that level. But obviously, the other thing that we are seeing is that quite a few companies, whether they already have an African presence or quite a few of our European and Turkish clients, are starting to position themselves to take advantage of the broader continental free trade area once it's implemented. So there is a sense amongst countries that have a good understanding of how trade blocs work and what the benefits that can be accrued from them are, that this is an opportunity to tap into larger markets than they currently do. So I think, our feeling is that what also needs to be done is that the Continental Free Trade Agreement in and of its own won't be a game changer unless you are more strategic and you start to look at it in the context of things like local content requirements, particularly into mega projects, and utilizing those types of things in concert So you would utilize a regional approach, looking at local content, looking at value added in market in conjunction with the free trader area, and then you have a better chance of benefiting from that over the longer term.
All right. So Duncan, I mean, you highlighted a point there that I'd like you to just talk about a little bit more. Essentially painting the picture of, that this trade area agreement is susceptible to bullies, the ones who understand how trade blocks work and the benefits. And, obviously the risk with that is that the real kind of, SMEs and where the impact really needs to be felt, can end up not achieving that result. How can that be addressed, and how best could that be changed?
I think that there are a couple of issues around that. Firstly, you need to assess whether SMEs are export ready. We do quite a lot of work in this space, and if you're an SME that is struggling in a domestic market, you'll kill your business by trying to become an exporter, because exports by definition are more risky. They're not as profitable usually as sales in a domestic market. So we need to be aware of that. But on the flip side, we see a lot of our smaller clients who are part of a larger industry or project value chain. And that, I think, is where the opportunity starts to come into play, is being part of a local value chain into some of the bigger projects, picking up and having joint ventures with partners in other African markets. So, if you're a smallish company in South Africa or Nigeria or Ghana, Kenya, it makes sense to look at markets that you wanting to penetrate and saying to yourself, where do I find a local partner in that country that would be able to assist me in developing my business there? So a lot of it gets around to connectivity. You're not going to get away from that. And I think it's important to understand that as we look at developing intra-regional trade, we look at always being able to look at it from the perspective of that it is a two-way street, and that it's not just about big economies exporting an overflow of local production into smaller economies, but that it's also about long-term sustainability and finding the correct partners in markets, developing those partners in those markets so that we keep as much of that expertise and that product development and that trade within Africa, rather than sourcing it from outside of Africa. That said, you do have your very large multinationals that are also a key to the implementation of large projects. The ones in Mozambique being a very good example, $25 billion LNG project that's taken off. It's too big for any company in Africa to do that. But what we can do is become critical suppliers of goods and services into those project developments. And I think that really is where we need to take a realistic view of what we can do and how we can do it, and then approach it aggressively. Almost every country in Africa now has local content requirements or preferential procurement requirements within their countries. And the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, goes a long way to underpinning the attractiveness of looking at those local operations and local and regional partnerships.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Duncan. Caroline says in a message, I totally agree with Aditya and Duncan that it is very important that businesses and more broadly citizens understand the agreement. One reason for Brexit was that many people in the UK did not understand the benefits of being part of the EU. So that's something to also think about. I'm going to take one or two more comments before we move on to our last speaker, who's John Rocha, who's just joined us. So welcome and hello, John. Perhaps can I pick on Mappy? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, I've got a number of comments. Maybe can start with the
Sorry, can I ask you to just introduce yourself first?
Okay, my name is Martin Kambi. I'm the founder of the company called Mindset Content Creation. training for my editor-in-chief of PSA. I train journalists around the country. I'm quite, I have followed the SCFTA for a while now, and I've followed how the interviews are done around the subject. And it's my view that as much as we're talking about this, we're about to launch it in January, that there haven't been any efforts from the Secretariat to actually familiarize the journalism community with the subject. And the end result of that is that you get, when I line up interview with some people from the Secretariat in the past, was that you get me from asking you to write a question for journalists. That's a problem, given the fact that the countries who are interested in trading with Africa, like China and other European countries, have invested a lot in terms of training journalists and taking them to their country. So I think in terms of all AU bodies and regional bodies, there's a need to train journalists in the subject because we're facing a danger where the only time that this secretariat is going to be covered is when the issue is statement. For example, if you look at South Africa now, there's a big issue around the trucking strike. And no one had looked at the trucking strike in the context of whether the started protocol on the movement of person and goods, or even on what we are in the stage with the African free trade area. And I think that small things like people don't know why it's called free trade area rather than free trade agreement, because no one is communicating this. We are just still speaking amongst each other as elites, and everybody quotes the numbers that we might have, but there is not an emphasis on how we are going to get there. And then one of the interesting observations that I've actually made, especially when it comes to both Ghana and South Africa in this COVID era, is that we've always, one of the key revenue earners for the two countries historically. And what we've done is that we've always targeted international tourists, and as a result, our tourism sector is only needs. Now, the borders in the continent are open, but there hasn't been an emphasis of actually focusing on selling these two countries to a local market. I loved when I watched CNN, when I watched the American election, that Ghana spent so much amount of money advertising during the election day in the US, but knowing very well that it's very difficult for now to attract travelers from the US. And it's the same thing for South Africa with, at least Ghana is still trying to solve the country. South Africa is not even selling because they don't know how to do yet. This is a great opportunity for the two countries to actually now focus their marketing strategy on the local market. So for me, I just think that the mindset, actually training about the agreement is still, the free trade area is still a very gray area for a lot of people. And it's not translating to some of the decisions that countries are making. And if you look at the track strike, is that even with the response of President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday, there's no mention as to why this needs to happen, why we need a quick intervention, because an economic sabotage of that nature means that you can't trade amongst each other. You can't argue that on South Africans must move goods around the SADC region. So that's my input.
Great. Thank you so much, Mappy. And I'll take one last contribution before we move on to our next speaker.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Henry Munagatir. I am an entrepreneur and business person operating in South Africa. I think it's fantastic that the conversation has gone to address Africa free trade, which stands for the biggest opportunity for Africa post-colonialism. Because addressing this essentially addresses the colonial legacy. However, I think the biggest problem we have in Africa is really more of leadership. I've been involved in business around SADC, and it's extremely difficult, I think, as one gentleman explained, to trade goods across borders. If you want to export from Zimbabwe to any other country, for example, in Zambia, which is just 4 hours away, Lusaka is 4 hours away from Harare, it's extremely difficult. And these are the challenges you have when you have long border waits, trucks get stopped for 8 hours, yet this is supposed to be free trade. So I think a lot of the conversation must now move from academic to the practical. How do I, as a business person, access markets practically? And this is the challenge that people have. We have a lot of trade, but the problem is it tends to be easier to export things to Europe, China, Asia, and all these other places than to your next neighboring countries. So I think whilst we are talking about this, there has to be a very real conversation about leadership. Do we have the leadership that can do this? These things are not complicated. You go to Germany, for example, if you want to go from Germany to Netherlands to Italy, and you say you've got oranges from Spain. A truck of oranges from Spain moves to Germany without any stops, as though they're trading in Spain. And this is exactly how it should be. We need to move beyond the academic. You know, the Schengen territory is a very good example of something that works. It works. Africa free trade is stuck in academia. We have the AU, SADC, it doesn't even work. And these are the challenges we need to address. So I think what we as Africans need to do now is we need to put more emphasis on practical steps. Our leaders for too long are just talking. They go to these events and they talk. 20 years of talking about free trade. It's not rocket science. Open up the borders. Let's make things happen. We're the business people sitting here. We want to do business and invest and make money, but we can't do that as long as things continue the way they are. So my contribution basically is, ladies and gentlemen, if this is going to happen, let's move our leaders beyond talk. Practical action. I need to get on go to Zambia and do business or move my goods across the border without my truck being stuck for 8 hours at Chirudu border post. For what? And these are the practicalities that hamper business. Because my opponents in Spain or Italy, they don't even have a border post. They just move straight through. So these are the practicalities we need to address. Simple things. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Henry, for that contribution. And on that note, it's 28 minutes past 11 here in Johannesburg, and we will make a shift back to our guest speaker panel. John, we're 2 minutes early, but I'm wondering if you're ready for your presentation.
Yes, I am. I don't know if you allow me to share or.
All right. Let me see if I can work with that.
Or I emailed it to you, so you could just upload it if you cannot from your side. Then.
Yeah, I think that's easier.
Right.
Yeah,
sorry.
You got my email first?
Is that here?
Hi, John.
Yes.
Okay, you got my email close from the last email I sent you?
Yes, I emailed it to you and to other. So.
All right. Okay, let me access.
If you could just open it, it's all right.
Okay, in the meantime, John, just give us a bit of your background, because we know you work for NEPAD.
Thank you very much, and I listened to I came in when Duncan was still making some comments, and then I heard the last speaker, the gentleman that was speaking, and I could sense his sense of frustration, and which I share to a certain extent. My name is John Rusher. I'm the Chief Director of Trade Invest Africa at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition in Pretoria. So we just changed our name from purely Department of Trade and Industry. Now we added competition. And Trade Invest Africa is part of a broader